To begin with, the term bourgeois simply means that if something is in my possession, or if I believe it to be in my possession, then I fight to retain it if anybody, I won't share it with somebody else. And if I'm a bourgeois and there's something in your possession, or if I believe it to be in your possession, I won't contest it. The bourgeois has been the same throughout my work. I did have a type called the grabber, kind of a gangster type of guy. And he's just somebody who doesn't respect anybody's property rights at all. That's the same thing as if you have a bourgeois who always makes a mistake, doesn't understand. The punisher was not a very good word. It sounded kind of nasty. And so I used the word civic, which sounds more elevated, to describe the same thing. Somebody who upholds a norm of sharing and is willing to punish others, actually to risk some cost for self in doing that. I think that you asked a question also about the ambiguity of property rights and the incomplete contracts. But if I contest your good, perhaps because I think it's mine, or perhaps because I just think I can contest it, it means that you don't have secure control over your good. And it means, for example, then that, and if I can do that successfully, then it's clear that we don't have a complete property right, in your case, for the ownership of your good. Now, of course, IPRs, intellectual property rights, still have a very major role and can have a major role. And they can be like other forms of wealth, accumulated and inherited and so on. So it's really a question. First it's a question of what's going on. I happen to know a fair amount about the textbook market, and what I know is that the publishers have almost given up about intellectual property rights with textbooks, because it's just so easy to copy them. And I think this is true of a great many things. Now there's some areas in which there's some where, for example, in music seems to be an area in which there's been a fair amount of enforcement. That's why we have things like Spotify and so on. But I think in general, the zero copying cost really changes the story a lot. In order to have my jacket, you have to remove it from me. But in order to have my ideas, I don't even notice that you've stolen them. So I think there's a big difference. Of course, IPRs will be important. And if the US government and the US position on IPRs is successful, then of course we will have a substantial element of the weightless economy that becomes, what did you say, weightful, or something like that. It is of course true that a major part of our economies are today composed of things which don't correspond at all to the weightless economy. This is true in the rich economies like Japan, US, and so on. It's also true in the poor economies. But actually, if you look at the data about what are people doing, look at the distribution of work across occupations. The evidence in the US is just go and look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. What are the most rapidly growing jobs? Almost none of them is producing anything. It's in health services, protective services, meaning guards and so on, and also a lot in education, caring for the elderly. So I think the evidence for that is really quite strong. I don't mean to, I add in caring and leisure, things complementary to leisure. That's a huge number of people. It really is very large compared to the number of people who do what we're doing, basically, which is distributing and producing knowledge. There's a lot of exaggeration about how that's a major part of the economy. It's pretty important, but it's maybe 15% or something like that. It's not a huge amount. The working hours data are referred to the United States. I think similar data would occur in most countries with incomes at the level of the United States, and less so in other countries. Of course, the use of knowledge is costly, everyone can read Wikipedia, but not everybody can read, so access to that is actually something that people don't have. But what a difference it is. First, most people have enough intelligence, enough reading ability to read Wikipedia. Think about access to something else. Think about the landless laborers throughout human history who didn't have a little piece of land to grow on their things on. There's no way they can get it. There's no way legally that they could get that unless, of course, they were very lucky and so on. So access to things which are important to be productive is now a lot cheaper, even though it's not free. Except for one thing. The example of the land, or the example of, let's say we're talking about an industry which has an advantage because of increasing returns. It's a manufacturing industry. And so we're thinking about what's the possibility that we could go and contest that industry and compete with it. Well, we could do it. If we're a large industry and if we have savings and so on, we can go in and compete with them. The problem with intellectual property rights is that if they're enforced, they're a monopoly. There's no way that you can compete with them. Unless, of course, you can invent a substitute or get patents to produce a substitute. So in some sense, the intellectual property rights are an even worse kind of monopoly of an asset than would be the case just because of the unequal distribution of wealth. Now, whether or not the weightless economy turns out to be an inegalitarian economy, which it could very well be, or a more equal one, is, I think, a completely open question because of the question that you asked. The huge gains to be made from these two-sided markets, that is things, Facebook and so on, where the people who actually own the network make tremendous gains. And it's very difficult to compete with them because of the increasing returns on the demand side. That is, the network externalities make them pretty invulnerable to attack. And so I would like to say that I think the prospect for a more egalitarian future is really quite positive in an information-based economy. But a lot of that depends on what happens in the IPR field, and a lot depends on exactly how these increasing returns are handled and how the winner-take-all aspect of the information economy is managed in public policy. And I think that's enough. Thank you very much for your questions.